If you're just tuning in, we're going to be starting in a few minutes. We're just making sure everybody gets in. Just going to give it another minute before we get started, just to make sure everybody's with us. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dorothy Guzza, the Executive Director of the New Jersey Historic Trust. Welcome to our Grantee webinar. We are recording this, and the recording will be available sometime next week. So if you need to review anything, you'll be able to refer back to it. Okay, next slide, please. I assume if you're tuning in today, you've received a grant from the Historic Trust, so congratulations, you've made it through the first hurdle. The funding bill was signed by Governor Murphy in December, so from our perspective, we are ready to start. This is a webinar, so you should be able to see who's speaking on the slideshow, but you won't see any of your other colleagues in attendance. And you can adjust who you see on the screen by changing the gallery view to speaker view in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. If you have questions along the way, use the Q&A function at the bottom, and we are monitoring the Q&A, so we'll be sure to get to your question at the end of each session and generally at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. I think most of you know that the Historic Trust is governed by a citizen board that is appointed by the governor. Our funding is a dedicated portion of the corporate business tax. As you may remember, there was a ballot question to use the corporate business tax to fund open space, farmland, and historic preservation way back in 2014, and that the voters overwhelmingly approved this initiative. Our funding does require legislative support, and it does need a final signature by the governor to become available. Next slide, please. So today you're going to hear from several of our staff members on how to get started and how to manage your grant. So at this point, I'm going to turn this over to Vito, and I'm going to wish you all the best of luck in executing your project.
Good afternoon, everyone. So like Dorothy said, this is a webinar, which if you've been on Zoom calls before, this one's going to be a little bit different. We cannot see you, we cannot hear you, and we don't have an active chat function. So if you have any questions, we do have a Q&A feature that can be accessed at the bottom of your screen. You can go ahead and type any questions you may have in there. We encourage you to wait till the end of each section to ask any questions that you may have in case that they're answered ahead of time. So with that Q&A function, you can go ahead and submit those. And sorry, repeating my script twice. Next slide, please. So today's agenda, I'll start here with the overview of the grant agreement process and an introduction to the grant materials that you should have already received or will be receiving shortly. And then the rest of my staff here at the Trust will continue through discussing how we execute the grant agreement, how we define the scope of work for your grant agreement, any archaeological requirements, how to administer an active grant, how to close out a grant, and talking about some publicity for your project, and then a general Q&A at the end for any questions that you might have. Next slide, please. So the main outline of the grant agreement process can be seen here on your screen, and congratulations, you guys have already completed step 1, which is coming to this workshop. So we hold this workshop to explain all of the administrative requirements of the grant agreement and to answer any questions that you guys might have before we get started and move forward. After this meeting, we will request that you submit all of your supporting documentation in the grantee info packet, which we will be discussing shortly. After submitting your grantee info packet and we have all of the necessary information to execute the grant agreement, Trust staff will assemble all of those materials and send 2 original copies of the complete grant agreement to you for signature. These will be signed with a physical signature and returned to the Trust, where they will then be sent upstairs to the Department of Community Affairs Fiscal Office to be activated and executed. Once the agreement has been executed, all reporting, signage, and easement requirements that have been listed in your grant agreement and we've discussed throughout that whole process will then be in effect. Next slide, please. So you might be asking about what is this grantee info packet? So your grantee info packet should have been sent to you several weeks ago. It contains a checklist and a few different supporting forms, which Carrie will discuss in just a moment. These forms are all due filled out to us in physical form by Friday, March 10th. In addition to your grantee info packet, there's also the grantee manual, an image of which can be seen here on screen. And if you'd like to go to the next slide, please, for me. That can also be found on our website. So the entire grant manual and a bunch of other helpful documents to help support you through the grant process can be found on the resources tab at njht.org, specifically under For Grantees. Next slide, please.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Carrie Hogan and I'm the Trust's Fiscal Officer. Today I'll be covering the checklist of documents in your grantee packet, which are needed to draft and execute your grant agreement. The quicker you get these documents and forms filled out and get them to your program officer, or PO as we call them, the faster your grant agreement can be drafted and executed. The Trust cannot process any reimbursement requests without a fully executed grant agreement. So we're going to start here. Next slide, please. So the first form in your grantee packet is the checklist. The checklist itself, along with all the items listed on it, need to be completed and returned to your PO as part of your initial grant agreement package. Please note that the checklist documents are not your grant agreement. They are simply the essential forms that we use to create your grant agreement contract. So after the checklist itself, the first item you need to provide is the letter of acceptance. The second page of the letter of acceptance needs to be filled out and signed. By signing the letter of acceptance, you are agreeing to abide by the regulations that govern this grant program, including the requirement to inform your program officer at the trust of all new developments that pertain to your grant project. Your PO should receive copies of all documentation for review and approval before proceeding with any work. Next slide, please. So next on the checklist is the information form. The information form is critical to creating the grant agreement. Number 3 on the information form deserves special attention. It's your vendor ID number. All grantees must be registered with NJ Start, which is the state's mandatory procurement and payment system, to get a vendor number. Registration in NJ Start creates an account profile for the grantee so that checks can be issued for approved grant reimbursements. Please make sure that you enter your organization's EIN or employee identification number and a good mailing address to which you will receive your reimbursement checks. The contact and address that you enter into your NJ Start profile should match the same name and address on your grant agreement. Incorrect information entered into NJ Start registration will delay the execution of your grant agreement and possibly delay payments on your award. Please note that most county and municipal entities are already in the state's vendor system via their EIN number. It's likely that you've been paid one way or another by the state. However, it's best to contact NJ Start directly to confirm that your preferred address and contact information are up to date, or else you run the risk of your grant reimbursement check floating around box to box at City Hall. So there is a helpline to make sure that the information in your profile is correct and that you have a good address on file to receive payment. The helpline is for getting registered in NJ Start and checking on existing profiles. And you can see that the information is right there. They have a help desk phone number and they have an email address. They're pretty responsive. They have a whole team of people where this is just what they do. So they're waiting to help you if you need help registering. It doesn't take very long though. And if you have any questions about your vendor identification number or the accuracy of your profile or signing into your profile, please contact the help team directly with all of those questions. Also, please note that in NJ Start, you do have an option to sign up for ACH or automatic payments. These are electronic payments that deposit grant reimbursement funds directly into your organization's designated bank account. So instead of waiting for a paper check from Treasury to come in the mail, your approved reimbursements will move automatically to your chosen business account. So something to consider. And if you're signing up new, it's a great time to sign up for ACH. Next slide, please. Insurance. The next item on your checklist is proof of insurance. All grantees must maintain insurance coverage for the entire term of the grant agreement. Grantees must provide a COI, Accord Certificate of Insurance, to the trust. This is a standard document that insurance companies are very familiar with and can easily provide to you. So get in touch with your insurance agent or your insurance company now and let them know that you need one. It shouldn't take about a couple of days for them to turn it around and get it into your inbox. Please note that the New Jersey Historic Trust must be named as additionally insured in the lower left box of the Accord document. You can see there's a small box in the lower left-hand corner. That's where we want to see New Jersey Historic Trust, our name, our address. Please also include your project number on the certificate. This way we can match up any subsequent Accord certifications to your project file. Grantees must submit a COI Accord to the trust before the grant agreement can be executed. Missing or incomplete information will delay the process and you'll have to go back to your insurance company to get it corrected and resubmitted. So reach out to them soon. Next slide, please. Next is attachment E, the governing body board resolution. Your governing body or board needs to pass a resolution certifying the amount of the grant that you have been awarded and identify by name the individual authorized to sign or execute the grant agreement on your organization's behalf. In other words, the person named in attachment E must be the same person who ultimately signed the grant agreement. The resolution must have original signatures of the person approving the resolution, as well as the person attesting to the approval of the resolution. Approved by and attested by should not be the same person. All resolutions should be certified with a government, corporate, or notary seal or stamp. If your board secretary doesn't have an official stamp, and it's likely they might not, you must take your resolution to a notary for certification. And in fact, most nonprofits, they go straight to the notary anyway, just so there's no question as to whether the approved signature is properly certified. Resolutions that are not properly certified will not be accepted, which will delay completion of your grant agreement. We realize that board meetings happen probably quarterly, and you have about a month to get this into us. So please get your resolution on your next board meeting agenda, or possibly call a special meeting so that you can get this resolution passed and signed and certified. Next slide, please. Next is attachment G, the statement of adequacy of accounting system. Your CFO or treasurer must review the requirements of the grant agreement, including state required audits and reporting, and then sign this form. By signing, your financial officer is agreeing to be responsible for establishing and maintaining the financial statements for the grant. Your CFO treasurer is also the same person that certifies reimbursement requests and signs all payment vouchers. Please note that your CFO treasurer that signs this attachment G cannot be the same person authorized by resolution to execute the grant agreement. This provides the necessary checks and balances of healthy accounting. So that's everything on the checklist. Once you've completed all forms on the grantee packet correctly, then what you do is you surface mail them into your program officer at the trust so that she or he can prepare the grant agreement. Next, as Vito mentioned, 2 copies of the grant agreement will be sent back to you for original signature and return. Upon return of both those signed copies, Dorothy, the executive director, will sign them, and then we will forward it to the fiscal service offices at DCA. They will establish an account for payment. Finally, 1 fully executed grant agreement will be mailed back to you, and 1 will remain in the trust office on file. Please make sure that you keep your copy of the grant agreement somewhere safe and easily accessible. It is a living document and should be used by the project contact and team as a guide for compliance, reporting, and submitting reimbursement requests. That's all from me. Are there any questions?
There's no questions in the Q&A just yet. Maybe we can give people just a couple seconds to type something in if they have any questions.
Sure. Oh.
Okay, we've got one question.
Right, but how often can we submit reimbursement requests? Well, you can submit them. We understand that cash flow is an issue or can be an issue. So you can submit them pretty much whenever you have a good amount of work done, the invoices and canceled checks. It's a reimbursement program. So we're going to need all that information from you. So, there is technically no minimum amount that you can request, but it's probably best practice to get a few paid invoices in, and then send them in to us.
Carrie, this is Glenn.
Yes.
Sorry, but this is the HSM one. So actually there are only 2 reimbursements.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And I'll be going over that administering it after grant. So we'll get into detail with that.
Sorry about that. Yeah. So you get 80 if you make any payment. So if you make any payment to anybody for your grant, submit that invoice to your PO officer, and then you will get 80% of your grant with the first reimbursement. We retain 20%. You'll get that 20% back when you submit your final report. Sorry for any confusion.
Okay, we have some other questions now. The first one is 2 copies of grant agreement will be sent, and then we send back both copies with signatures, or just 1?
You send back both copies with signatures because they still have to be signed by Dorothy and DCA Fiscal. Then you'll get the fully executed grant agreement with all signatures back.
Okay, and our last question we have is, who should sign the grant agreement?
Well, the grant agreement is typically either signed by the project coordinator or the executive director of an organization, somebody who's going to be in charge of, be intimate with the details of the project and understand the grant funds, how they're being spent, what the project is for. Typically, it's for nonprofits, it's an executive director as the executing the grant agreement. Sometimes it's a board chair. So it just sort of depends, but it should be somebody who's very familiar with the project, who will read the agreement carefully and take the responsibilities of the grant process seriously, and be able to most importantly, be able to be in contact, somebody who's accessible for you and to this project.
Okay, thank you, Carrie. There's no more questions.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Shannon Bremer, and I'm going to be talking about defining your scope of work for your project. Next slide, please. So our attachment D1, or our scope of work form, is the component in our grant agreement that establishes the project being funded, as well as the costs associated with each component of the project. All the information in the D1 is based off of the scope of work that each of you submitted last spring when you applied for the grant funding. Each program officer will begin drafting the D1s over the coming weeks, and then we'll be sending them to you to look over, so that way we can ensure that we have all of the correct information and scope items. Then once you guys take a look at that and okay it, we have your completed info packet as well, we can begin formulating your grant agreement. Next slide, please. So I'm going to briefly walk us through each component of the D1, which you can see an example of on the screen. First, we list out all the general information about the grant. So this includes the name of the grantee, or who's receiving the funding, the project name, project number, as well as the grant award. The first section of the D1 is then a brief history and statement of significance for the site, as well as a short description of the project that's being funded. Next section establishes the trust as the primary project review authority and describes the review requirements we have for our grants. Sometimes there will be an extra party added to this. So for example, if you're matching, the match to your grant is funded by, say, another grant, whether that's from like somebody like the National Park Service, they would also be included in this section, since there's someone else that would need to review the documents as well. The third section is where we list out all of the activities being funded by the grant. So as you can see on the screen, each component of your scope of work is listed separately. I know it's a little hard to see when it's smaller print. But for example, if your scope of work is for a conditions assessment and an archaeological report, it would be listed individually under this section. This allows both you as the grantee and the trust to clearly see what deliverables you'll be responsible for at the very end of your project. Next slide. Under the third section, you'll also find a project budget section that lists the estimated costs for each activity being funded by the grant. All the amounts found in the project budget section are based off the submitted proposals from your consultants. The proposal is included as an exhibit in the grant agreement itself as well. Our HSM, Heritage Tourism, and Planning grants are reimbursed in 2 payments, as we mentioned before. The first payment is for 80% of the grant amount, and the second payment is for the final 20%. That second payment is received upon the closeout of your grant. The dollar amounts associated with those reimbursements will be provided for you in your D1 as well, so you can see exactly how much you'll get in each reimbursement. The final component of the D1 is your project schedule. These are important dates associated with your project, including the commencement date of your grant and the expiration date of your grant. I recommend keeping these on hand or posted somewhere you can see them, so that way you're aware of all your deadlines and can plan your grant-funded work accordingly. That way you're not at risk of having any problems or running into any issues later down the road. So as you can see on the screen, this is the project schedule for our 2022 HSM, Heritage Tourism, and Municipal Planning grants. The schedule is based off the day that the governor signed the appropriation bill for these grants, which in this case was December 22nd, 2022, and that date is known as the agreement commencement date. For most of you, December 22nd, 2022 will also be considered the work period commencement date. For those of you that started work prior to this date, we please ask that you provide your program officer with the date you actually began work so it can be reflected in the D1. From there, we have 18 months to execute the agreement. This is known as the agreement execution date. You must also begin work within that 18-month period. This is your project commencement deadline. For this grant round, that date is June 22nd, 2024. We do recommend that you execute your agreement sooner rather than later, as you cannot receive your initial reimbursement until the grant agreement is fully executed. The funded project must be completed within 2 years of the agreement commencement date, so in this case, it'll be by December 22nd, 2024. The agreement itself will expire 3 years after the agreement commencement date, so on December 22nd, 2025, and this allows you for an extra year after the work is completed to close out your grant. Extensions on these grants are not assumed and are only advised in extenuating circumstances. They must be requested and then approved by our Grants and Loans Committee. So we encourage working closely with your consultant to ensure that you follow these deadlines and dates as closely as possible, because it may be hard to get an extension if your agreement expires. In addition to defining the scope of work, we also use the D1 to identify your project team. All consultants working on the grant-funded project must be approved by trust staff and must meet our professional qualification standards. If you included resumes and project proposals from consultants in your original application, they are considered approved unless you've been informed otherwise. If you did not include any consultants in your original application, you must submit resumes and project proposals to your program officer to have them approved by the trust before work can begin. If you're unsure if your project team is appropriate or if they have been approved by the trust staff, please contact your program officer and they'll be more than happy to help figure that out for you. When you submit your initial reimbursement request, we do require a copy of a signed agreement or consultant contract, and we need to have that on file in order to process your reimbursement. So please make sure when you do submit that you have that copy of that signed agreement in that packet as well. So now I just want to bring your attention to the trust's project requirements for all funded work. All work must meet the Secretary of Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. This is a part of your program officer's job to review the submitted work to ensure that it meets the standards. Additionally, consideration of archaeology or the archaeological potential of your site is required for all preservation planning documents. My colleague Alexis will go into some more detail about that shortly. And finally, all preservation plans and historic structure reports funded by the trust must meet the formatting and content requirements laid out in our preparation guide. It's extremely important that the grantee as well as the consultant are aware of the requirements listed out in the guide, because this is what our program officers use to review those types of documents. There is a checklist of required sections and information within that guide, so we definitely recommend looking that over. The preparation guide can be found on our website under our resources tab in the For Grantees section. If you're having any trouble locating it, please contact your program officer and they'll be happy to provide you with a PDF copy or a link to its location on our website. And finally, I just want to go over the requirements that the state of New Jersey has, and this is something that all of our grantees are required to comply with. All of these are laid out in tab 3 of your grant manual. And these requirements can be somewhat nuanced and complex, so it's extremely important that your CFO reviews tab 3 of your grant manual in depth to familiarize themselves with the requirements. One of those requirements is the audit requirement. If your organization receives more than $100,000 in state and/or federal grants in any given fiscal year, you will be required to submit an audit. While none of your New Jersey Historic Trust grants will be more than $100,000, your organization may be receiving grants from other federal or state entities within a single fiscal year. If those amounts combined exceed $100,000, you will be required to submit an audit. Audit costs are not reimbursable expenses, so your organization will have to budget for the cost of the audit outside of the project. Our grants also have an affirmative action requirement. Our grantees, their consultants, and contractors are required to comply with the New Jersey state affirmative action laws. It's extremely important that you have the non-discrimination language and policy in any proposals or contracts related to your grant-funded activities. Your consultants are going to be required to show proof of compliance to the State Contract Compliance Unit through the Department of Treasury. There are a few ways they can demonstrate this compliance, and for more information regarding that, you can take a look at the grant manual. If you have any specific questions about the affirmative action compliance, they can be directed to the contract compliance unit. And do we have any questions?
No questions at this time, but let's give folks a minute or two to type in some questions if they have them.
Yep, sounds good.
Okay, we do have a question. This is, where can we find affirmative action requirements in the grant manual?
So the best way to locate that within the grant manual would be pulling up the PDF and searching affirmative action requirements. Trying to see if I can figure out directly where that is.
Isn't it chapter 3 as well as, I mean, the table of contents list out where that will be. So again, if you go to the website to pull up the grant manual, it'll direct you that way as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think that most of that information will be in that that tab 3 section.
All right, there are no other questions.
Great. Now I'm gonna pass it off to Alexis, who's gonna talk a little bit about our archaeological requirements.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alexis Salome, and I'm the Trust's archaeologist. I'm going to give you a very brief refresher of the archaeological requirements for receiving grant funding through the Trust, since we haven't met yet and you haven't talked about archaeology since your applicant workshop. As a reminder, even if the primary goal of your project is not an archaeological investigation, you must consider archaeology if you have any ground disturbing activities planned. Examples of the kinds of activities necessitating the consideration of archaeology may include, but are not limited to, the installation of buried utility lines, site grading related to the construction or expansion of parking lots and sidewalks, construction of ADA compliant improvements, removal and installation of footings, installation of HVAC systems, foundation work, and the installation of interpretive signage. At this point in the process, you should have considered archaeology already if needed. Your next step toward fulfilling the archaeological requirements for your project should be to select a qualified professional archaeologist and involve them in your project early so they can help ensure that any archaeological resources on your site are either avoided or excavated as appropriate. Keep in mind that archaeological testing, if needed, will need to occur before any ground disturbance. It's a good idea to handle the archaeological component of your project early in case any activities requiring ground disturbance need to occur that you hadn't planned on, such as a soil survey that might require trenching or probing, or in case something is discovered that might necessitate some alterations to your plans. I'd also like to note at this point that monitoring is not considered best practice and may be employed only in select circumstances. The decision to utilize monitoring as your archaeological approach must be made by a qualified professional archaeologist. And if you're unsure whether your current project plans require archaeology or how to select an archaeologist, please contact your program officer so we can discuss the specifics of your project in more detail. Many of you are in the planning stages of your projects and have no ground disturbing activities planned, so you might be wondering what archaeological considerations you might have to consider. Even if you don't have any ground disturbing activities planned for the current phase of work, you're still required to consider the archaeological potential of your site in all planning documents. Good preservation plans consider all of the resources on the properties they are concerned with, including those that are buried. We want to see that you have considered the archaeological potential of your site and what your plans would be for addressing any archaeological concerns you may have in the future. This might be as simple as stating if any ground disturbance is to occur, a professional archaeologist will be consulted prior to excavation, and it might be as comprehensive as enlisting an archaeologist to prepare an archaeological management plan. As you consider how you might incorporate archaeology into your planning documents, it might be beneficial to consider whether any of your goals may require archaeology as you envision the long-term stewardship of your site. For example, you might foresee wanting to make improvements to the foundations of one of the buildings on your site, or to eventually add visitor amenities such as a bathroom. These activities are just two examples of future projects that might eventually require the consideration of archaeology. And with a plan in place and considerations made in advance, you could save time and money down the road. You may also have research questions that can only be answered by archaeology that will further enrich the knowledge you have about the history of your site and its occupants. This is another consideration for the future, not to mention the public engagement opportunity that an archaeological investigation might present. While the scientific value of what you might uncover archaeologically is invaluable on its own, archaeology has the added benefit of being incredibly interesting to most people. Taking the opportunity to share the archaeology on your property with the people who visit and love it serves as an excellent avenue for increasing public engagement at your site. We've seen a number of successful public archaeology projects here at the Trust, where individuals are invited not only to observe the archaeology taking place on site, but also to participate in it. Depending on the scope of the archaeological investigation you'll be undertaking, archaeology can be used as a training opportunity as well, allowing for collaboration with local professional archaeologists and universities to build mutually beneficial partnerships that might broaden your network as well as serve the next generation of archaeologists. And on top of all of these wonderful benefits, archaeology can give new insight into your site and add to your understanding of its use and development over time, as well as provide you with some lovely artifacts to display and interpret from your own grounds. All of this and more could be yours when you use the archaeological requirements of your project as a tool for increasing public engagement. Are there any questions before we move on?
We do have one famous question. What is monitoring?
No problem. Monitoring is excavation by a non-archaeologist that's observed or overseen by an archaeologist. So it would be a situation where you have maybe a contractor or someone else that you've hired actually doing the excavation work, but you have an archaeologist on site overseeing it and making sure that nothing is being impacted.
Great. We have no other archaeology questions. Thank you.
All right, now I'm going to turn it over to Glenn, who's going to be reviewing how to administer your active grant.
Hello, everyone. My name is Glenn Saponis, and as Alexis just said, I'll be going over how to administer an active grant. Now, everything I'm about to go over is covered in detail in the grant manual. It's chapter 4 of your grant manual, including all examples of completed forms like reimbursement requests and stuff like that. So again, this is a quick overview. More detail, you should go to chapter 4 of your grant manual. Next, please. We encourage you to contact us if you have any questions whatsoever. No questions too small. Better to ask first than to have to redo something or have something rejected because of because you didn't check first. So always reach out to us with any kind of questions. Now, typically, after the grant agreement is signed and executed, you have your copy and the project's moving forward. Typically, we hear from you, when you send us drafts of your planning documents to be funded. All the documents that we are funding, we need to review, make sure it meets the Secretary of Interior standards. And then provide comments, and you guys will then make revisions if needed. Also, you'll send us contracts with your consultants preparing grant funded works. Quarterly reports as well as reimbursement requests are also typically times you communicate with us. And of course, you'll communicate with us at closeout time, giving us the approved grant funded projects after we've reviewed it. Keep in mind, we'll need 2 hard copies as well as 1 digital copy. As well as the final report and reimbursement request. Also, if you've not selected a consultant yet, you need to provide the trust with sufficient documentation on that consultant for us to determine if that consultant meets federal qualification standards. And as Shannon mentioned earlier, if you provided a consultant in your application and it's been approved, then you do not have to resubmit that information. unless that consultant is changed. Again, with planning documents, there aren't a lot of project meetings, but if there are, please invite us to project meetings. While we may not be able to attend all the meetings, we want to be aware what's going on and to plan to attend meetings if there's something specific that needs our input at the time. Perhaps even a site visit is needed. Again, as part of an investigation for a preservation plan or something like that. So let us know when they're taking place. If we can, we'll try to reach out and be there. Make sure we're also getting all meeting minutes, because we do review those, especially if we're not able to make it out to actual project meetings. Again, also let us know if you're proposing any changes to the proposed scope of work or consultants, because again, we need to approve both of those before it happens. Next, please. Submitting quarterly reports is another time that you will be reaching out to us. Reports are due in the middle of April, July, October, and January. The quarterly report is the attachment C1 of your grant agreement, which again, you'll be receiving back fully executed. And basically it's your, the first 2 pages of the C1 is your report, your quarterly report. The following pages is part of your reimbursement request. So the checklist of items include for your report a narrative, a team list, project schedule, and the project contact will then certify that these are all up to date and correct. Depending on your particular project, the narrative section may be a paragraph or 2, if that at all, depending on where you are in your project. These items in the report are especially important in the first report, because after that, then you basically could just use that as your base, and then you're basically updating or adding to that report. So you have to keep typing out your team list or whatever. You're just updating the initial. And again, these forms are also available via our website, so that you could actually type into the forms themselves. The quarter reports that don't include the reimbursement, like I said, consists of the first 2 pages of the form. And if there's little to report, again, with these planning type documents, typically you're hiring a consultant and they're off, doing their research, producing a report, and that takes a little time. So if there's nothing much to report except your consultant's working on it, a quick email, just letting us know that. But we do want to make sure we hear from you at least quarterly with what's going on. So like I said, even if there's no activity, let us know. It's on hold. We're waiting for the consultant to get started. That's fine. A quick email. And again, the manual chapter 4 shows you how to complete the quarterly report with examples. Next, please. So reimbursement requests for planning projects or planning grants, Heritage Tourism, the MCRP, and the HSM grants all have 2 reimbursement requests: an initial reimbursement of 80% of the grant award, and then a final 20%, which we do at the closeout of the grant. So with the 80%, again, this is after you've already executed the grant agreement. You must make sure we have a signed contract with your consultant. Also, you have to have made at least 1 payment, a retainer, in as well as an invoice that you've paid that initial payment. Could be as little as $100, or it could be a first full payment, whichever it is, but we need 1, as well as the proof of payment, the cancel check, some sort of bank statement. If you're a government agency, a fully executed purchase order, again, showing that the payment has been made. We also require at the time of reimbursement a signed payment voucher. Again, we cannot process a reimbursement without the state transmittal and payment voucher, and this requires an original signature. And again, that's the CFO or treasurer who was indicated on the attachment G that Carrie mentioned earlier in the presentation. Payments take approximately 3 weeks after receipt. DCA Fiscal has been pretty good, I'm knocking on wood, as far as processing this, but also, as Carrie mentioned, to ensure quicker delivery of your payment, sign up for the state's ACH system definitely does expedite things. The final 20% of the grant will be reimbursed when you close out the grant, and we have approved and accepted all documents funded by the grant, and the consultants have been paid in full. And again, you'll be showing us all invoices and cancel checks is part of this. And then you'll receive your final 20%. Next, please. Another time that you're dealing directly with your program officer is work product review. You are submitting work products to the trust in draft form for review and comment. Planning documents such as the preservation plans or HSRs, also construction drawings and specifications. All of this needs to be reviewed by the trust before it goes final. We do ask that you allow at least 4 weeks for review. Again, the final work product we produced after incorporating the trust comments. We do strongly encourage that all preservation planning documents include consideration of archaeology, as Alexis mentioned. And all preservation plans and HSRs must comply with those guidelines that Shannon had mentioned, presented in the preparation guide. This document is available on our website. The checklist, again, please work with your consultants to make sure that all aspects are being addressed. And if something is not, doesn't seem applicable, then say that so we know that you're purposely skipping over it because it's not applicable, not because you missed it. We will be reviewing that and getting back to you if we're not seeing certain sections completed. The substance of each section is meant to, again, help guide you through as stewards of the resource, so the information should be sufficiently detailed and complete to allow you to make decisions. Again, if sections are missing from the draft, we will require the documents to be revised to include that. And again, all that has to happen before you get your final 20% reimbursement. Next, please. The next thing I want to touch on is amending the grant agreement. There are times when a grant agreement needs to be amended. If the project is not on track, the grant agreement can be amended to allow you an opportunity to complete the project. If there's a change to the schedule for any reason, a change to the scope of work, or a change in the consultant or contractor, you must request a grant agreement to be amended. And again, you should be in communication with your program officer throughout this period, so it's not a surprise. We know something's coming up or there's been some delay. But again, if any of these things do need to change, we do need to make a formal request to our Grants and Loans Committee. That's the attachment D2 of your grant agreement. And again, the request will be reviewed by the Grants and Loans Committee at their quarterly meeting, and you'll be informed of whether it's been granted or not. We also understand there are times when delays are caused by circumstances beyond your control, but to the fullest extent possible. However, you should make sure that your project stays on schedule, because again, as Shannon mentioned, getting an extension is not guaranteed. The Trust Grants and Loans Committee will not automatically grant that extension, and it needs to be fully justified. And remember too that your grant management history is part of future grant application evaluation. So, trying to stay on track the best you can is important. Next, please. So, wrapping up here, I'm going to briefly go over closing out the grant. We have reviewed all and approved all work products to date, and everything is good. So let's close out the grant. Next slide, please. So for HSM Heritage Tourism and MCRP grants, you'll need to submit all final deliverables from your approved scope of work, items to your program officer at the trust. Again, if it was a preservation plan and national register nomination, whatever it is, all the final work and products need to be submitted to us and approved. You'll also be completing the C2 form, which is the final reimbursement request and report. Again, following the checklist on that. A final narrative and pictorial report, if appropriate, again, depending on what your project is, as well as all final financial documents is required. Again, all invoices, cancel checks that you haven't already submitted as part of your initial reimbursement. You'll also need to submit another payment voucher, again, original signature, in order for us to process that final 20% payment. Again, instructions and itemized checklists can be found in the C2 section in your grant agreement. And this is covered in Chapter 4 of your grant manual. Once all the elements of the final reimbursement report and request for reimbursement have been accepted and approved, you will receive that final remaining 20% of your grant award. Keep in mind that, again, you need to make all payments, total project costs need to be paid before you get that final 20%, because we need that final, not just invoice, but payment that just shows you've made the final payment. So at that point in time, it really is a reimbursement because you've already made all payments at that point in time. And again, just as a reminder, for all the documents, preservation plans or HSRs, archaeological reports, we need 2 hard copies and 1 digital copy to close out your grant. All right, we should have a list of questions, I see.
Yes, we do have some questions here. So the first one is, who is responsible for preparing and sending over the quarterly reports?
It's whoever you mention as, well, whoever you designate in your organization do it. It's usually the main project contact. It may be the same person that signed the grant agreement, but it's whoever you list as your main project contact, because they're the ones who we have their contact information, we'll be reaching back and forth to, but it's your designee, basically, the grantee's designee.
Okay, and then this next question is sort of a clarification they need. So they're confused by the nomenclature that we use. Can the project contact and the project coordinator and the authorized signatory all be the same person?
Yes, but it cannot be the same person that's signing the payment and transmittal voucher or the attachment G. That's your CFO treasurer. That person cannot be the same one who's signing the grant agreement itself. Although I guess it could be the person who's submitting reports, but it just cannot be the CFO cannot be the same one who signs your actual grant agreement.
Okay.
But project contact administrator, I mean, I guess, you know, they could be seen as the same person.
And the last question we have here is, I believe, in relation to the final reimbursement request. What is included in the final grant funded documentation?
There's a narrative that basically describes the project. You'll be providing all additional financial information, you know, the invoices and canceled checks that you did not include in the initial one, as well as any media minutes that may have been taken throughout the grant project, and finally the final work product. Again, whether it's a national register nomination, a preservation plan, again, 2 hard copies and 1 digital copy. But again, chapter 4 we'll give you a checklist under the C2 as far as what's all expected in that final reimbursement request, and yeah.
Great. That's all the questions we have right now.
Well, let's turn it over to Ashley to talk about advertising and publicizing your project.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you all for hanging in there. You've received a lot of information this afternoon, but we're in the home stretch. So once again, my name is Ashley Parker. In addition to being a program officer, I am also the communications coordinator here at the Trust. So I'm just going to go over how publicity can play an important role in your project. Okay. So publicity helps maintain visibility of your project and organization during the preservation campaign. It can increase attendance and/or membership for programs and activities, and can also attract new funding support and additional resources. Publicizing your project also promotes and raises awareness of history and historic preservation in New Jersey. This helps ensure ongoing funding for historic preservation. So good publicity opportunities are grant award announcements and check presentations, project milestones such as groundbreaking or ribbon cutting ceremonies, tours, special events, or profiles of volunteers, staff, or special craftsmen, public archaeology, as Alexis mentioned earlier, or letters to your legislatures and representatives. So these opportunities can all be achieved by news or journal articles about your project, social media posts, or special televised news coverage. If you are interested in coordinating a check presentation or grant award announcement, please contact your program officer. We have a large check for presentations that looks great in photos, and we're very eager to use it. Additionally, your site might also be eligible for inclusion on Journey Through Jersey, which is the state's go-to website for all things heritage tourism that was launched by the Trust in 2017. The website features heritage tourism destinations throughout the state, in addition to annual events educational resources, blog posts, and travel itineraries, which are also featured on Journey Through Jersey's Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter pages. We also host unique educational opportunities for Journey Through Jersey site managers. For example, in 2022, 10 Journey Through Jersey participants received complimentary registration to the Travel and Tourism Conference. We highly encourage you to nominate your visitor-ready site. Journey Through Jersey will publicize your resource for free. You will also receive a welcome packet upon joining that will include a window decal and postcard with the QR code that links visitors to the Journey Through Jersey website. We only ask that if you are a participating resource that you include Journey Through Jersey's logo with the link to the website on your organization's homepage. If you'd like to learn more about Journey Through Jersey, would like to be featured, or interested in writing a blog post, please contact me directly. My contact information can be found at the end of this presentation and on the Trust's website. So stay in touch with us help you promote your project. The Trust is active on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. We encourage you to tag us in your posts, send us news coverage, progress photos, events, or any other content that you would like us to share. There are no guarantees, but we do try to post as much as we can. We also kindly ask you to reshare our posts and link to our website in order to help us raise awareness about funding opportunities and historic preservation in New Jersey. So at this time, I'd like to turn the presentation back over to my colleague, Judy, to address any last-minute questions that you might have.
We don't have any questions in the Q&A right now, but let's give it a minute in case anyone has any final questions.
You've answered all their questions.
No more
Good sign.
questions.
No more questions. Well, and if they do, your emails are there, and definitely don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything that you think of after you get started. Oh, we do have something, but I don't know that it's a question. Oh, okay, we do.
Yeah, this is a question for you, Ashley. What are some examples of when to use publicity?
Absolutely. So right now, if you'd like, you could do a grant award announcement, letting know your community that you were awarded a historic site management grant from the New Jersey Historic Trust. You can also publicize tours or special events that you might be hosting at your site, or even profiles of volunteers or staff or special craftsmen. You can also write letters to your legislatures and representatives, thanking them if they submitted a letter of support and just letting them know that your site was awarded a historic trust grant, are all good publicity opportunities for you to pursue.
Great, thank you.
I don't see any other questions. So with that, I think we're going to say good luck. Don't hesitate to call us, and we wish you all well in executing these projects. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you very much for hanging on till the very end. And we're looking forward to working with you.
Thank you, everyone.